I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The Revelation of Jesus Christ, the Faithful Witness. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 21 of our study, which covers the book of Revelation, chapter 20. In this lesson, we continue tying up loose ends and wrapping up some of these things that have to get wrapped up before we get to where we're going, which I know is a little vague, but I can't tell you where we're going yet because we're not there and I don't want to get ahead. Where we've been, hopefully you remember, but just in case, we have dealt with some of these evil things, right? We've dealt with the church version, the harlot. We have dealt with the beasts now and their army. We're down to the dragon. We've reviewed the Pentecost component here a lot already, so I'll just introduce here as a reminder. We are at that point where we're transitioning from these sevens into the 50th day, and everything, and that's our end of the book, right? Is our 50th day, and we're kind of on or through day 49, but not really at day 50 yet. Still, we've started. At the end of the last lesson, we started some liturgical things that indicate we're moving into 50. But there are some things in the way here yet in the form of the devil and some separations that aren't directly to do with the devil, but are kind of related, that have to change as well, spatially, and you could argue even temporally here as we're moving toward where we're going. So we're wrapping some of those things up in this lesson, which is all interesting. By way of caveat, and I'll mostly just, I think probably mostly just talk about it here in the intro, but it is worth mentioning. There's a lot of stuff out there about this chapter. It has a period that's often called the 1,000-year reign, for reasons that will become obvious. Someone's reigning for 1,000 years. It's just obvious. A lot has been made of this, and there are a lot of ideas out there around about it. And as is way too often the case with Bible study, the more that happens, the harder things get, and it's not because the text itself is hard, it's because you have floating around in your mind an idea, someone else's interpretation, and it's hard to take a fresh look. When we first were going through Revelation in the forum that became the first draft of this Bible study, this was, for that reason, by far the hardest chapter that we dealt with. Because there are so many things that it could be, and it's hard to find where and how it fits. Except it's not. I expect, for anyone who has, by now, if you've watched all these videos along the way, you're going on 20 hours deep into, or more, into pretty deep dive into Revelation. I don't expect that you will find this difficult, actually. It picks up on themes that, and an approach, and I think it logically follows from everything else that we've done. And we've built the framework that allows this to make sense. But there are a lot of things out there still that confuse the issue. So by way of that, I will say, anyone who looks for a literal period of 1,000 years, how could you get this far into the book of Revelation and see what all of the other numbers in the book of Revelation do in terms of symbolism only, and then try to find a period of 1,000 years? But people do that, right? There are lengthy arguments about what exact 1,000 years this is about, and when and where it falls in history, and that's. I don't know how you could possibly think that at this point, right? Without all the context that we have, if you've missed a lot of what else is going on with the book, sure, okay, maybe you think that. But that's not how the prophecy here in Revelation has worked, right? That's not how any of it has worked. So I urge you, don't try to think of this as an exact, literal 1,000 years. That will greatly help with understanding here. The other part of it that will help greatly with understanding here, that we will talk more about as we go through this, is it's not necessarily a 1,000-year reign on earth. So people try to find where in human history has God reigned and in what capacity for 1,000 years exactly on earth. And has it happened yet? Is it still going to happen? And they're looking for the wrong time in terms of periods and in the wrong place in terms of the reign. And so you get all of these increasingly bizarre theories where you're trying to impose your view of Revelation onto human history and find a place where it fits. And because it doesn't, because that's not what it's about, you get a lot of different ideas for how that is supposed to work. But the whole project of trying to place it in that when and in that where is doomed because it's wrong. And so we will do much better as we go through this if we all get on the same page now, that we are not looking for a specific period of 1,000 years as a when, and we're not constraining ourselves to the earth being the where. We'll see that the text strongly suggests it's not, and then we'll look at it as a reign in heaven. Beyond that, we have seen up to, depending on how you want to look at it, 5 different times in Revelation, and only 5 different times. You have beginning, you have middle with Jesus Christ, you have the end of time, and you have the period between beginning and middle, and you have the period between middle and end. You have 5 possible different times that things can be happening at in the book of Revelation, right? We've gone through 7 weeks and repetitions of various forms of things happening in one or more of those 5 different times, period. So if we have 1,000 years, okay, great, it's 1,000 years, but it's also, it has to be one or more of those 5 times. Those are our only options in how the book of Revelation looks at time and history. And we have in the book of Revelation 3 places that things can happen: above the earth, on the earth, below the earth. So we have 5 times and 3 places, and anything beyond that is not, I mean, it would be entirely new, right? It's not consistent with how the book of Revelation has dealt with time and space. 5 times 3 spaces. I don't think it's intentional that adds up to 8. I think that's just a coincidence, but it does, and it's neat, but it's probably not a thing. So we have, broadly speaking, a reminder, the project of the book of Revelation, as we've looked at it, has been, from John's point of view, in the middle of those 5 times, right? Just after Jesus, or maybe he's in the 4th, right? After Jesus rises, he's in the between of Jesus' resurrection and the end of time. And he's saying his project is, hey, all of this prophecy that led us to and showed us about Jesus didn't just do that, right? Like, it was showing us past that. And so let's make sure that we look at everything that has been as something that's telling us what is to come. when we have in Revelation talked about any of what had been, it was always to recast it, to review it in a forward instead of a past-looking way. So as we're coming to the end of the book, we're not going to be looking backwards, right? We're not going to be looking at beginning to Jesus or even Jesus' life, right? So we're in those later times, for sure. And all three of the spaces are going to be involved. We'll see that. It's neat. But so we're focusing on, as we're wrapping up, we're in the later phase of the time before the end, is where I would orient in general where we've been talking about, right? On our 49th out of 50 days for our new Pentecost. So anything we talk about time-wise that's going to be relevant from whatever narrative perspective the book of Revelation manages to have is going to strongly suggest some form of then. I almost said there, but it's not a place, it's a time. Which is it's neat how all of that works. We are going to deal with, in this time, in this lesson, a look of another perspective on kind of the wrap up of the end of time here. We know we're going to deal with the devil, and we're going to start to introduce the thing that comes after the devil. We actually start to see what this 50th day is going to look like. We've got a couple more lessons for all of that to unfold, but here we finish the tying up of loose ends from the point of view of evil. The things that are keeping that 50th day from happening get tied up here. And then the last little bit is the totally new thing. This is getting rid of the old things. So we're going to summarize, finish up the old things, and get us in a spot where we're ready for the new thing. So we'll see important interplay between both time and space. And we'll focus it on time that is between Jesus and the end of time, because that's the relevant period for all of that to be happening. And we'll keep anchoring as we get to the text various references to time and space in that framework so we can all track what's going on. But the key point here is really just we're bringing things to a conclusion, so we must be when and where that is going to happen. We start with a thing that is familiar, and sort of a new one. We have seen previously a number of times where a thing from the first half of the book comes up again in the second half of the book. Again, intentional, just as a thing in the first half of time comes up again in the second half of time. Example, the Exodus, and everything else in the Old Testament of note, which you probably know by now. Same happens in the book of Revelation, right? You see a thing in the first half, you see it again in the second half. Not an accident, right? The whole structure of this book is deliberately paralleling all of human history, but in a different way. It's incredible. So we see that bottomless pit and the key to the bottomless pit, this time held in the hand of an angel who also happens to have a chain. But remember, if you will, when we saw it previously, what is in that pit. That's where we've been keeping the devil, right? And the idea of the pit, we have, again, three places, right? We have earth, where we are. We have heaven, where God is. And God has not, except in Jesus' form, but not in God the Father form, come to earth. That's not a thing, as we've talked about, that earth can tolerate, right? God coming to earth would destroy earth, which we're going to do. But we've got to be ready for that first. You cannot stand in the presence of God and live. So there's clear and necessary separation between heaven and earth until earth is something that is capable of being heaven. Then you've got your separation of God has bound away from earth the things of evil so that they don't have free reign on earth. But and it's just the extending of the influence, right? We saw the dragon from the sea extending his influence in the form of these beasts, and the harlot and these things onto the earth. But the dragon himself was separated and bound away from earth, just as God is self-imposing a kind of an exile for our sake, so that neither acts directly on the earth. And that has been the state of things. And so we are about to interact some with the devil, whom we have to find where he is trapped below the earth. So that is the setup here. Remember, devil below the earth, God above the earth, us on the earth. Those are 3 places we're about to do something that involves below the earth. Then this angel, come back to that, seizes the dragon and binds him for 1,000 years and shuts and seals him in the pit for 1,000 years. And then after that, he must be let out for a little while, we see. Let's start with the angel, who has the power and authority to bind the power and authority of the devil. We've already seen multiple times that an angel can also be Jesus. Here's another one, right? Like, who else is going to do that? Like, you could say Michael and people, because he's the one who does battle with the devil. And yes, Michael does battle with the devil, right? It's a famous image, but it's not really the image we've had in the book of Revelation. And we have seen these keys already in the possession of Jesus. And those mean, like, a key means more than just like being a warrior, right? It means power and authority and control. This is the thing that was achieved to anchor us and win, that was achieved by the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? He overthrew the unmitigated power of the devil over humanity, right? Before that, everyone died. The devil was very thoroughly reigning on earth in a way that doomed all people. Then Jesus died and rose from the dead, and in so doing, he bound or limited the power of Satan. Now, as we've talked about, we are in a situation where the devil cannot damn you. He does not have that power now. He did. By virtue of your birth, you already belonged to him. Now you don't. And he has no power to doom or to damn you. You can still be doomed or damned, but you have to now do it to yourself. So his power has been greatly bound and limited and restricted by Jesus Christ, who has power over the devil and has limited the devil's power over us so that we can be saved. So the devil is bound for a period of time. When is that? In our 5 times. Beginning of time, between the beginning and Jesus, during Jesus on earth, between Jesus on earth and the end of time, or the end of time. Well, if the thing that gives Jesus that power over the devil and creates that reality where people are not guaranteed under the reign and sway of the devil, that has to be after the resurrection of Christ. And time hasn't ended yet. So this 1,000-year period of time is necessarily after the resurrection of Jesus and before the end of time, and that fourth little block of time there. So that is when we are talking about. 1,000 by its nature is a number that just is a lot, right? It's not, hey, it starts on Easter of the year 33 and continues until our Pentecost of the year 33 and starts, and then in the year 1033 on Pentecost, it's over and now the devil has been released. And no. It's 1,000 because it's a bunch. We are in this 1,000-year reign. It started more than 1,000 years ago. And it could continue for more than 1,000 years more. It is a bunch. And Jesus is reigning, which raises one of the next questions we'll get to a bit further in the text. It doesn't look very much like Jesus is reigning. And that's actually a really an important and an interesting idea that we gloss over in Christianity too much. We say, the church I go to is Christ the King, right? We say that Christ is King. And then you look at the world, and is he though? And we just sort of gloss over it as a matter of faith, right? Oh no, he's totally King, and this is all how he wants things to be going. Well, yes, and yes, but then why is it this? Which we've talked about, and the book of Revelation has previously provided an answer to, but lest anyone not be remembering that part when we're here, it's very important. It's critically important. It's the whole thing here with this book. It's the now of our lives of this book that is the relevant part. This is being allowed now for you and for me and for each and every person to have the ability to realize the destiny for which all of humanity was created, to live eternally in the image and likeness and unity with God, in eternal heaven with God. That there are openings, there are vacancies there, and God is seeking to fill those vacancies, and you are invited to be one of the people who fills those vacancies. For that all to happen, there has to be this time where we are free from being directly ruled by the devil and not compelled by God, where we have the ability to choose. The reign of God is one of giving us the ability to choose. We've talked some about the interplay, and I'm not going to get deeply into this, but there's a really neat thing here that I want to talk about. We've talked some about the interplay between politics and how all of this is working. This is like the opposite, but the really cool opposite of democracy, right? And democracy is, the idea is we as people have the ability to choose who rules us, and that affects how our lives go. This is that flipped on its head. The ruler has instead given us the ability to choose individually how our lives go and to have that be meaningful. Our free will was bound, and he as our king says, no, you choose. No more is that choice made for you by any outside powers, by God or the devil. Now you choose. His reign is one of you choose. That's what his kingship looks like, is freeing our will. It's so foreign to us who abuse power to think that I would have the kingly level of power of Jesus and not use it to compel people to do what I want them to. Because for us, that is the exercise of power, right? Is when I exercise power over another person, I am compelling their will to choose to do what I want them to do. That's power, right? That's the only way I can possibly exercise any power is to make people do what I want. Well, no, definitely not. And I think we've probably all learned that. I remember a time when I learned that in my life when I was much younger and still not yet Christian and still like this was like pre-high school days and just starting to find myself. I had a guy who was a good friend of mine, and I realized, I came to realize that I was being manipulative, right? In our friendship, I was like, manipulating him into doing and thinking some things I wanted him to, and it was easy. It just was a thing I naturally came to do without realizing I did it, and like, yuck, right? Like that's not being a very good friend. And I noticed this about myself that this is not how friends are, right? Like, and I need to not do this. And so, but I was exercising a certain amount of power over this person through the friendship, and I honestly believed that was being a friend at that time. But then I realized, no, that's not true. And I thought, okay, I've got to back way off from this, right? We're not doing this. This is not how you're a friend. And as I backed off from that, very much the right thing to do. And he found, himself and his own, without that control, like he started making decisions, as did I suppose, that ultimately led our friendship to go in different directions and severed the friendship. But I mean, that was a choice he had to make, right? I was being far more of a friend to this person by not exhibiting that control and helping him be free to do it himself than I ever was when I was exercising any kind of control over him. But it took me a long time to figure out and to come to terms with a lot of what was going on there. Our default position as people, without reflection, is that our exercise of power over other people is to control what they think and what they do. And so we look at the world and say, God is not controlling what I think or what I do. God is not in charge. No. The fact that you get to control what you think and what you do is because God is in charge. And that is an invitation for you to choose God on your own. Right? You can't really be friends with someone when you are dominating their will in any capacity. And God, let alone more than friends. And God wants to be, not in a weird romantic way, but God wants to be more than friends with us. Right? Let's say family, because that's the image he uses the most, because it's the thing closest to our understanding. But it's more than that too. And he has freed us to choose that. That is God's exercise of power, is one of empowering our will. There cannot be and will not be a human institution that does that. Almost by our institutions are all built on how some people exercise power over other people. It's how we socialize. It's how we organize. We have to have people in charge, and they have to be able to direct other people. And we're ultimately, the fact that we exercise power that way is ultimately a sign of how powerless we are. But for God, who is all powerful, he doesn't care, right? Like, he doesn't need to, it's such a petty thing for him to get into compelling an individual person to do an individual thing. Like, that is so beneath God, right? Like, that would be like me going outside into my yard and trying to make an ant go right instead of left when it's walking along the grass. Like, who cares? But we attribute so often to God that level of, oh, he compelled this particular event in this particular area of the world. He doesn't care what happens. He cares that you individually, personally, and me individually, personally, love him. That's it. It's what we do is a manifestation of that love of God. So he cares about it insofar as it shows who we are. But what he cares about is that we love him. And it's unfathomable that he cares about that, right? Like, again, the ant example, I don't care what the ants in my yard think about me or if they do at all. But God still cares if you think about him, what you think about him. And love in this case is not an act of feel. It's not how you feel about him. It sort of is. But of course, love is an act not of feeling, but of will, right? You will God. That is the love that is desired. The will is the capacity that you've been given to move toward God. So these things that God asks us to do to create relationship with him, faith, hope, love, these are things that are not an act of the feeling. They're not an act of the intellect. They're an act of the will. They're an act of choice. You choose faith. It's not a thing like, oh yeah, I have faith. And it's not a thing, oh, I believe in God, right? Faith, that trust is, I choose God, like with all that I am, right? The more that faith, hope, and love are correctly understood as an aspect or a function of the will rather than like anything else, the more they're the same thing. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing, which is I will God in everything that I do, right? Like, my life, my existence through time is one, sure, of an ongoing thought process and a dialect, but it is an ongoing act of will, right? Like, every moment of my life, conscious moment, involves various directions of my will, of choice. And the call is that being that is constantly choosing, constantly willing, is constantly oriented toward God. That's the call. And your will has been freed to be directed toward God. If you are living a Christian life as it is intended, every conscious breathing moment, who you are at that level of your will should be oriented to God. Which is why it gets so offensive when people say, oh, I'm covered because I believe in God, right? And who aren't doing ever any of that. Because that's definitely not what he means. And God didn't die and rise from the dead to free our will to be able to choose him, to watch us just say, yeah, he's pretty great, I guess. Now let me go do the things that I want somewhere else. And yeah, that's not why this is. Very long and maybe a little circuitous route here to talk about. It's really important, but I think it's very important to understand what the reign of God looks like, because it's not the thing that we look for when we look for someone reigning. It is a different thing because God is different from us, and power for God looks different than power for God's with power and ours so very different. And that's, I didn't tease it in the intro, because to do so you really have to go through what that exercise of what does God's reign look like. That's the other mistake people make when they look at this passage and try to find the 1,000-year reign of God, is they're looking for a human exercise of power. So they're missing the when, they're missing the where, and they're missing the what, right? Like, they're fundamentally mischaracterizing the 1,000 years, what reign is, where, like, every part of it. If you say 1,000-year reign, they're making as many mistakes as there are words in it when they start doing that, which is, again, doomed prospect. But the important takeaway for us is this 1,000-year reign is now, right? Like, all of this that is God's exercise of power to free us to choose him is now. So that means you need to be doing that now. That's the other thing they do, right? They like to put it in the past or in the future, and not in the now. So it's not a thing that has to be acted on with great urgency, but it is a thing that has to be acted on with great urgency because it's now. And 1,000 years is a long time. And I said, 1,000 years means a long time. It could be, who knows, 10,000 years, whatever. While that is true, it could also be, for the sake of easy math, right? It didn't start at year 0, but it sort of did. It could be, this is the beginning of 2023 as we're shooting this video. It could be 2023 years. Right? It's been more than 1,000 years. Like, we've already passed the expiration date on that carton, right? Like, it said 1,000 years. So, like, every time you pull that milk out of the fridge, you're going to have to, still good? Okay, yeah, I'm still good for now, but, like, we're past the due date. So maybe don't think, maybe at the year 500, you could think, yeah, I'm probably good to mess around for a little while. When you're more than 2 times past the expiration date printed on the carton here for this version of reality, you probably want to tread a little carefully and with great urgency. Great urgency is the takeaway, right? We get comfortable and complacent that time has lasted for a long time, so surely it will. And maybe it will. And maybe it won't. It could be over tomorrow, could be over today, could be over 10,000 years from now. And whether it's over for everyone or not, it will still not, you still won't be here 10,000 years from now to see it if that's when it ends. For you, it's still very short in the grand scheme. And there's a lot involved, right? If the call is to live your life in a way where your will is constantly oriented toward God. And I'm going to assume that most of you watching this video are more like me, and you do that hardly at all. The amount of work it takes to get from hardly at all to constantly is the work of a lifetime. It's not a thing that you're going to get sick, be told by a doctor you have 6 months to live, and be able to work out. You won't have time. By the time you realize that the duration of the finite amount of time that you have left, it will be too short to achieve the task that you've been given. So it needs to be done now, and urgently now. And I say that to myself more than to anyone watching these videos. Now is the time to do that. So yeah, 1,000-year reign. Jesus exercising power through power of the devil bound. It's going to last for 1,000 years. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom judgment was committed or given. Where have we seen thrones before? Where? not on earth, right? Remember when John went up to heaven in a vision and there were all those thrones there? And never did we see any thrones down on earth, because that wasn't relevant. We talked about kings down on earth, but where we see thrones, you're looking up. So where is this reign happening? Alluded to it in the intro, but this 1,000-year reign is primarily happening in heaven, which is also why we don't see it all the time, because the seat of power of this reign is very much not a place we can go. We still can't go to heaven. We still can't see it. And up there you see reigning, you see you see the saints, right? I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast or its image and not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. There is, in the period of this reign, a group of people who gets to enter heaven, right? We know that from our theology. They're called saints. We'll get to it in the text here in a bit. There's also a group of people who are ultimately heaven-bound who don't get to go there yet, in purgatory. We'll get to those, but there are some people, the people who have used the freedom that God gave them to choose God with everything that they have. They didn't let the beast tempt them with money and power and all those things and turn them from God. And they continued to stay true to giving testimony to God, sometimes to Jesus, sometimes even at the cost of their lives. And whether it was through martyrdom, the short and all at once cost, or through the longer price that's paid through living that life where we orient ourselves entirely toward God, is a sacrifice, right? When Jesus talks about doing it, he says, take up your cross and follow me, not grab your pony and let's go for a ride. It's glorious, it's loving, it's good. There's suffering, there's sacrifice. You can't be on God's side and be in and participate in all the things of the world. It's a necessary division. It is holiness. It's separation from the things of the world. And when you're in the world, that hurts. It will hurt. You have to be in the world and then say, nah, not that. While the world is all saying, but this. No, not that either. But this. And while, sure, you build the habits of preferring a very simple and austere life without letting those distractions pull you away from God, that attitude is one of sacrifice, modeled by Jesus Christ, and he made it very clear that we would have to do that as well. And where we end during this reign, when our lives come to an end, depends on the extent to which we've been able to separate ourselves from those things of the world. If you do a great job, then good, you get to reign with Jesus now, come back to life. If you don't, we'll see. There's a way to be not doomed and not reigning there yet. And that's probably the more common outcome. But there are people now reigning with God in heaven, based on the lives that they lived here. So to continue the point, the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection, the one where some people made it. And that happens between Christ and the end of time. Then there is the final judgment, resurrection, death, all of those things, where more people have a chance. We'll get to that also. There will be more judging and culling and all of that. The text is pretty clear. You want to be in the ones now, right? You're safe if you make it to heaven now. And you don't have to go through whatever's coming, which we'll get to, because you're already covered. That's the way to do it, as the text is blessed and holy as he shares in the first resurrection, right? That's what you want. That's what we're going for. There's this idea, and I've said it myself, and as we're talking through this, I now kind of wish I hadn't and probably won't again, floating out there of aim for heaven so that if you miss and go to purgatory, you're still covered. As I think about it now in this context, and again, I've said this a lot, so no, I'm not trying to bash anybody who subscribes to this idea. It's an easy one to see how people can get to. In the context of this, it seems like a really toxic idea in Christianity, right? You shouldn't be, if you go into it thinking, I'm gonna try for more than I think I'm going to get, then you're saying I'm actually comfortable not being all in with God, right? You're building in, I don't really want to go all the way, so I'm gonna set a higher goal than I really think. Like, that is not being all in, right? That is hedging your bets. And that is very explicitly what God doesn't want us doing. So I see how and why people think that. It's helpful in a lot of other goal setting. Right? Like at work, we set a lot of what we call stretch goals, right? Like, I'm going to take what I think is the attainable goal, and I'm going to make the goal that I'm trying to hit 10 or 20% more than that. And that hopefully motivates me to make sure I at least get to what I thought I could hit and maybe a little more, but never do I think I'm actually going to attain the end goal that I'm setting. Okay, in a business that is in no way or shape or form concerned with anyone's immortal soul, that works great. But if you take that attitude and you say, cool, we're going to treat my immortal soul the same way. I'm going to take what I think I can do. I'm going to set a goal higher than that. And, if I don't get to it, then I'm good. What a bad way to look at the single most important thing, and actually the only important thing you will ever do. To build in the idea of failure into the only important thing you're ever going to do is you're not setting yourself up for success. As I'm talking through this, I think I'm never going to say that again to people, and I'm going to push back a little bit when they do, I think. Because this is an all or nothing game that we're playing. You either live eternally forever with God, or you don't. And at some point, which we'll see here at the end, you get two chances, right? You get the easy guaranteed way. You come to the end of this life, you've done enough in this life, you're a saint, whether you're named as such or not, and you go to heaven and live in the presence of God even now. Or you didn't make that, and there's some future judgment looming, and you can yet make it or not. And the rules of that are less clear. And you just don't want to be that. Even if it can work out, you don't want to be that. Your fate is still not determined. And you miss out on time with God, right? Like, I know in next to an eternity, however many extra years you get is maybe nothing, but it's also not nothing, right? It's it is meant to be, our relationship with God is meant to be the supreme, greatest, and only thing that, I mean, it's what we were created for. It's our true destiny as people. And anything that tries to introduce or accept an idea that any measure of not achieving that is okay is not consistent with what God has asked of us, which is not the same as we're going to fail at that too, right? Like, you can be trying with everything you have and still fail. That's why it's important to try with everything you have and not to treat it like, oh, I'm going to mess up sometimes, right? Like, another example. If I'm on a diet and I have a cheat day built in and I'm just going to eat whatever I want today, cheat day. Oh, whoops, I failed at my diet a little bit. No big deal. I'll try again later. And you keep having periods of cheating that keep leading to you staying the same or even getting worse while you're generally dieting. Okay, who cares, right? Like, I mean, it's not great. You're not going to achieve your goals. You're not going to get to where you want to get. You'll be living in kind of a half state where you're eating well some of the time, but not enough. And you're never really doing what you want, but you're never really getting where you're trying to go either. So, yeah, no, that's no fun. And it's stupid. And people do it a lot. I do it a lot. But what does it really matter? But if you approach your relationship with God the same way, I'm going to be okay sometimes, and then I'm going to, have this cheat period where I'm not going to worry about doing things for God. And so you end up spending years at best treading water in spiritual life, in your relationship with God. And you justify it with, well, I'm going to try to hit heaven, but if I don't and I miss by a little bit, then I'm still covered. What you've done is you have justified mediocrity that can be death eternal. Not making progress in the spiritual life is not okay. And I think we get to that point where, I'll speak for me. You can decide for yourselves if this is relevant to you. I get to a point where the status quo seems okay, right? Like, am I as holy as I want to be? Oh, definitely not. Am I as bad as I once was? Oh, definitely not. So I'm good, right? I'm between heaven and hell. That's where purgatory is. So, I mean, worst case, I'm probably good. Definitely not. That kind of, and that's the attitude if you go back to the letters at the beginning of the book of Revelation. If you remember what Jesus said about being lukewarm, that's what he thinks about that attitude, which is, it was the thing he was the most against, if you remember. But that is what that is, right? Is I have become complacent. I'm not trying to get closer to God, and I'm letting myself veer off track and have all of these carve-outs in my life that are cheating, that are not all in. And I grow comfortable with that. And in the back of my mind have this rationalization that it's going to be okay. That's how those lies work, right? They creep in and say, well, you're good here, so you can do this. You're kind of okay there, so you can do this, right? For everything you're doing well, you get one where you don't, right? Like, and when your scorecard is even, no, that is not at all how that works. Nor did Jesus anywhere tell us that that's how that works. That it's a lie. It's one of those lies that creeps in. But we get complacent. I know very few people that I can look at now and look at how I knew them 5 years ago and say, you're holier than you were 5 years ago. Obviously so. I can't think of one right now that I would hold up as that is obviously true. I'm sure there are some, and there have been some at different times in my life. And I generally hang out with churchy people, right? It's easier in the beginning because you have more to distance yourself from, and some of that is honestly easier. But I think most of us get to a point where we make some of that initial progress and decide this is good enough, right? Whether we've admitted it out loud to ourselves or not, I think we get to a point where we say, okay, this is where I'm comfortable. You don't live Christianity where it's comfortable. Like, again, Jesus called us very explicitly to not do that. If you're living a Christian life where you're comfortable, you're not. You're not living a Christian life. Anyway, food for thought. I just made myself very uncomfortable, which is what ought to happen reading the scriptures, right? If we read this and we're just kind of, dozing off a little bit, or it's a book study and it's like, oh, that's interesting about the 1,000-year reign, and oh, I didn't realize that was in heaven. I know that now, and that's an interesting thing to know. Then you haven't engaged with the point of Bible study, right? But if instead you can read that and say, and if it's making you uncomfortable, then congratulations, that at least you're doing right. The next step is, are you going to do anything? Am I going to do anything about it? And that way too often settles back in on, no, I'm comfortable, or later, are the two that really come up. I'm good with where I'm at right now. Maybe later tends to be how that goes. And that's why, again, I repeat so often in these videos the call to some sort of urgency and lack of complacency. We should be uncomfortable with where we are, and we should be giving everything we have to change that now. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations. That's interesting. So we know when the 1,000 years are. So after the 1,000 years, we also know when that is, right? That's the end. In this section, there are a few pretty subtle and interesting things happening with language. It's not, he will come out and deceive the nations. He will come out to deceive the nations. There's a difference between he does it and that's his intent. And as stated here, that is his intent. He's been in prison all this time. He's had his power limited, and now the gates open, and he's, I'm going to go deceive those nations. And I'm going to bring all my armies with me, and man, now we're really going to do it. Not, 1,000 years are over, now I, the devil, am coming out, and I'm reigning again for a while, right? That's another thing that people think when they misinterpret this passage. He doesn't come out and deceive the nations. He comes out to deceive the nations, a task at which he fails spectacularly. But a lot of those misreadings assume that he succeeds, and that there's another period of Jesus reigns and then the devil reigns again. How can the devil overthrow the reign of Jesus? That's preposterous. There's no way. What is very significant that's happening is, so we've had three places, heaven, earth, below the earth. We're going to have one place. Those barriers, those boundaries don't work. with what God is bringing about. You don't have three places, you're going to have one place. And so you have to let the devil out, because there's not going to be a below the earth. And God's going to come down, and we're going to see there's not going to be an above the earth and the earth. There's just going to be the one place. So you get to the end of the time of Christ, you have to let the devil out, because you have to, this is like spring cleaning, right? You have all the crap that you put in your garage over the course of the winter, and it's a big mess, and like you can't use it, right? You can't start doing yard work when all that stuff's in your garage, and it's spring and you need to do yard work now, and your garage is a mess and you can't get to any of your stuff. You have a problem, because now it's time, spring, that you need to be doing stuff with your garage. And so you have spring cleaning is born, right? Where you go in and you get rid of all of that junk that's cluttering up the way, so that you can use your garage as you intended to. So creation has had this junk pile in the garage of below the earth that has been accumulating clutter for more than 1,000 years, for all time, and it's gotten really messy. And creation can't all get to where it's intended to be while you have all of this junk that's built up below the earth. So what the devil thinks is God's going in and, I'm going to come out and I'm going to reign and I'm going to deceive the nations and I'm going to bring my army and it's going to be, and I'm going to get back on top. And what God thinks is, I've got to clean up that junk. And it's no fun, and it might take part of a Saturday, but like, there's never any doubt going in that when it's done, the garage is going to be clean, and it's going to be back to its original purpose. So that's how we should read this, right? Not like there's a whole other period of reign of the devil after he gets out of prison, and oh man, there's so much wickedness now in the world again. No, this is happening because there's not wickedness in the world anymore, so we don't need this anymore. And so he surrounds where God is with all of his armies and everything, and pow, right? Again, anticlimactic. Fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And we switched from between verses 8 and 9, that's the other interesting language thing that happens. We change tenses, right? Satan will be released from prison, 7, will come out to deceive the nations, 8, and they marched past 9, up over the broad earth and surrounded past the camp, and fire came down from heaven and consumed them. It's such an anticlimactic event that the text goes from future tense to past tense without even describing it in the present. You don't even need and there is a great battle and blah, blah. No, it's just you go from future to past without any stops in between, because it's such a non-event. So we're to continue to build on the metaphor, I guess. Here we are cleaning house in a certain extent, and continuing to get ready for the next thing. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and false prophet were, and they were tormented day and night forever and ever. So, there's a lake of fire. If you were thinking that this is hell, there's a little bit there that doesn't work very well, was it? Right? Well, think about this with me. When we conceive of hell, we think of basically the pit, right? Where Satan and his armies were, and he was in control, right? And he torments other people. In the lake of fire, the devil is tormented. We don't think of hell as a place for where the devil is tormented. We think of it as a place where he reigns. So, okay, yeah, we associate fire with hell, and this is a lake of fire. It's not correct to think of this as we tend to conceive of hell, because the devil is also being tormented. There's an interesting idea here to explore. God created the devil to be eternal. He created you to be eternal as well, right? We have earthly bodies and short time spans, but our souls are forever. God makes things, people, beings, he makes them eternal. And there was once a time where he looked at unmaking things that were made in the form of a flood. And afterwards he said, no, I'm not going to destroy the world by a flood again. I'm not going to unmake the things that I have created. They will stay made. That creates an interesting situation. We don't just stop being, nor does the devil. That is not, God giving us being is not going to remove it. That is a gift that you will have forever. That is a gift that the devil will have forever. Whatever forever means, we are, he is. So you have to remove the devil from having influence on the world, but by creating him, you have guaranteed his existence. And you have bound yourself as God to not go back on that. So you just have a devil. And there's going to be a devil who is an angel, as any other angel. And you have a lot of humans who are not exactly going to end up in beatitude either. Hell as we know it now is a place where the devil reigns and tortures and torments people. We've talked some about how that works and how we participate in making our own hell as well, and the interplay and how all of that works. That's the hell now. There is this other thing that it is not, even if it is a lake of fire, it is not hell as we conceive of it. It is not more fun. It is not more pleasant. What exactly that is very hard to say, but it is not, and we'll see the lake is not, the fire is not quite done doing things yet. We'll see just a little bit more, but don't think of it as hell. It shares things in common, but it's not the hell that we conceive of. And there's a way to conceive of it. So you are the devil and you have set yourself against God, right? He created you. You are like, I am so awesome. And I know everything, and in knowing everything, I've decided I'm awesome and not God is awesome. And that creates a division between me and God. And so I'm going to set myself against God. That's traditionally how theology sees the devil. So you set yourself to work against God and God's people, and that becomes your life, your existence. Imagine as the world comes to an end and no one is any more subject to death or deceit or falsehood or corruption. You have a world where there is no evil anymore, and everyone and everything in it serves God. How would you feel as that devil? You're placed off to the side somewhere to watch, and with no power to affect any of it. That would be awful, right? And possibly also you're there with the realization that you could have been participating, not as evil, but as good. And that you have, by your choice, cut yourself off from that. I think therein lies the torment, right? This isn't like God sets up a torture shop to finally, devil, we've been opposed to each other for all this time, and finally I have you in my clutches and I can torture you for all of you. That's not how God thinks either, right? The problem of the devil at the end of time is that God has created him and he has allowed created things, people, angels, to be eternal. And so God can't just end the devil. At this point, that's not a thing that can occur. So you end up with necessary torment for a devil no longer participating in created reality. The same, of course, is true for people. If you, the immediate hell you can go to pretty much right now, it can become very present in your life, even on earth and afterwards as well. Where the devil still reigns is a different kind of torment than the one where things come to an end and you're a bystander with no power to change anything and separated from God forever by the choices that you have made. But we're in the same boat as the devil is, in that we are eternal beings. We don't go back like the devil does to the beginning of time. There are different kinds of infinity, right? There's an infinity that extends forever in two directions. There's also an infinity that starts one place and extends forever out from there. That's you. That's me. The immortal souls that we've been given are eternal. That's why it's such a big deal. Every human life is such a big deal. It's tied to these bodies that are transitory, passing, dead, are tied to a soul that is eternal. And the time we have here now determines what happens to that soul. So when you do something to cut short the time that someone has here to make that soul, to dispose that soul to spend eternity with God, you are doing irreparable harm to an eternal thing, which is why all manner of right to life is such an important thing. This period of time in this life is the only time, Satan had one moment, right? Theology says he was created, he was all-knowing, he had a single moment of choice, for or against God, and he chose against God. And that was a choice that bound him for all eternity. And then we think, I have a lot of moments for choice. I have forever for choice. No, you have 100 years out of a billion years. You basically, when looked at in the grand scheme of things, also have just a moment to choose. And anything that shortens, constrains, or compels your will during that moment is horrible. It's so little time already that anything that artificially shortens it is appalling to the nature of who and what you are, which is why we hold life in such great regard. You're not ending the soul of a person when you kill a person. You're just ending that window that they have within which to make of that soul a thing that can live forever with God. The soul continues regardless, but the moment of opportunity, we should be making, as previously mentioned at some length in this video, we should be making as much as we can of every now. And every life should be given the maximum, every soul should be given the maximum opportunity to make of the time that we're given as much as we can have. And anything that shortens that is an abomination. Artificially shortens that. So there's a lake of fire. That was a long way away from, and still very related to, there is a lake of fire. And so the devil is finally off in this lake of fire. And there's a great white throne. And him who sat upon it. We've not really talked much about God the Father here. We've talked a lot about Jesus, but his dad has been the specter has been looming, but now he makes an appearance. And what happens? From his presence, earth and sky fled away. No place was found for them. So we've had places. We've had three. We've had under the earth, on the earth, and above the earth. We just opened up and cleaned out under the earth. So that's not really a thing anymore. And now, from above the earth is coming God the Father, and above the earth and the earth itself are like, nope, we're out. Which is not a thing that we can really very well conceive of God's presence making places not places. But we're down to one place now. Right? And then the lake of fire is sort of adjacent to that place. And is still in the one place, but sort of not. Anyway, don't think too hard about it. It doesn't matter so much where the lake of fire is. It's not a where, it's a what, or at best. Don't think of it as it has to be a place. There's just the one place, and it is all where God is, and God is in it. He's deliberately been outside of any of these places, because as we see, when he comes into any of these places, it all changes. This slightly challenges how we tend to conceive of heaven. Because we haven't seen God the Father even in heaven. We've seen Jesus in heaven. And now God is entering the sky, heaven, and even heaven itself is exiting his presence. But heaven is, of course, where God is. That's like the main thing, the main way we think about heaven is where God is. But there is heaven where we can go, and where Jesus is, which is not quite where God is, right? In the now, there is still, we get to be in union with Jesus, and Jesus is in union with the Father, but Jesus creates right now that link between us and the Father, and there is still otherwise separation, right? We are in Christ, and Christ is in God, so we are in God. But we are still not directly, we still right now have relationship with God only through the intermediary of his Son. So the heaven we go to is a heaven with Jesus. And Jesus has the relationship with the Father. That's our right now, in the time that we're in now. That's not our then, in the time that is to come. In the end of things, we are directly in the presence of God the Father, which is the new and the final thing that we're working on. And it's restoring to humanity some element of what we were originally meant to be. If you think back to just after in the beginning, there was a place of paradise where humanity did coexist with God before we knew any sin, and we were able to be in the presence of God. And then there was sin, and then we were not. And the whole of our history has been, we're not getting back to the garden exactly, because of course that was such a fragile arrangement where a single sin could sever it um, forever, seemingly. Um, what is restored is better than what was lost. It's infinitely better than what was lost. But it does kind of resemble it in kind, right? We are once again able to exist as people in the presence of God. The Father is where we're going to. And we're going there very quickly as he's coming down now. And so we're down to only a single place, and we're moving toward a time that will be only a single time. But we're still in our end of time into the final period, day 50 a little bit here. Time is still progressing, but not much longer. And space is coalescing, but there's a bit more to do there as well. But that's sort of where we're at, and it's quite significant that finally God the Father is making this appearance at the end of time. Here at last, we see what is happening to people. We've kind of throughout our journey here, we've touched on it at various points, and this won't be quite the last one, but it's pretty close to the last one, and it's the big one. So what happens? And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were open. Also another book was open, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books and by what they had done. So, what are we talking about here? This isn't like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings and the Iliad. When we talk about books here, and it's important that there are two kinds, right? There are books and book, which is not capital B book, but it almost could be. Books. Each of us writes a book when we live our lives, is the image being used here, right? I choose this instead of that. There's a story, right? There's the story of you that is written down in a book by the choices you make, right? Your will, your choices, your actions create a story as you live your life. And that's all recorded in the eyes of God. And it doesn't leave anything out. You don't get to tear out the chapter of your embarrassing years in junior high school. And it all counts. But that's also great news because it all counts, right? If your story right now is kind of, and you're still alive, you're still writing your story. It doesn't have to end the way that it is right now. But at some point, your story is done being written. And you're still around, seems to be the idea here, right? It's an interesting thing about the state of a soul. A soul being eternal, and right now, this life being where you write the story by which you are judged. You will exist after the period of time for which you will be judged. And you will be bound eternally to the consequences of what you do during this period of time. Once the book is written, the book is written, and that's what you will be judged on. But you will be after that. It's an odd thing to think about, because there will be more of you after that's passed, and that will last for much longer in time than now. But of course, from the point of view of eternity, time is an interesting thing. We talk about Lucifer in a similar way, right? The devil, created with all knowledge, right? Angels are omnipotent or omniscient. and then at the moment of their creation, they knew everything. They made a choice, right? Their choice was, theology talks about their choice being once and done. They chose for God or not for God. And we think, oh, we're so different from those angels because we have lots of time and make lots of choices. But, if you think about it, it's easy for me at just now 40 years old to think about 40 years is a lot of time because it's the sum total of time that I have known. But if I exist from January 31st, 1983, forward forever into, right? There are different kinds of eternity, right? There's infinity that goes back and forward infinitely in time, like God. There's a lesser but still infinite infinity that starts January 31st, 1983 and goes forever. That's me. I am eternal. At 40 years into that, 40 years seems like a long time. At 1,000,000,000 years into that, the difference between me and an angel in terms of how much time was allowed to choose is functionally nothing. It comes down to a very similar thing, though we don't have full knowledge at the point that we're making our decisions, which is why we get a little bit more time to figure it out. And that's your job right now, right? You are here to figure it out, and you are writing a story as you figure it out. And as we've talked about through the book of Revelation, you are using your ability to choose to do that. That is the significant thing that we have, is our ability to choose. And so we are writing a book. Then we come to the end of our lives. Our book is compared against this other book, the book of life, which gets people's names written in it, and it's described as having names in it. I think it's probably more than that. In other places, it seems like it very much refers to the law as well, right? Like if you think about it, here's what I did, here's the book that talks about what I can and can't do, and then here's a place to write the names of the people who did the things they were supposed to. To me, that makes sense, right? That book needs to the judgment is with God, but that's sort of the rules, right? We know that there are rules and that is how we are judged. And that's the important part, right? The books are really not relevant. Although, as we're doing Bible study, there also is a book that we have that helps us know those rules. So like if you're looking for the book of life in terms of what you should and shouldn't do, like you're reading it. Congratulations on doing Bible study, and I mean that. Like you're doing what you need to be doing in that regard. You are reading and studying the book that will guide you to life. But of course, your book has to match it, right? That's the neat part about Bible study, and it's the call of it is your life as a book is meant to match the Bible as you read and understand it, right? The more similar you become to what you read in the living Word of God, you yourself become the living Word of God as Jesus calls you to be, as you read and study the Bible, then you belong in the book of life because you are the living Word of God, right? You become, as Word of God, something that can be written in the book that is God's. Because you are his words, so you get to be written down in his book. And if you don't undertake that process, then you can't be written in that book because you are not telling something about God, right? Jesus' primary example, John tells us, in the beginning was the Word. Right? Jesus himself is the Word of God made flesh. But not only Jesus is that. You're meant to be as well. And reading and studying the Bible and growing in our relationship with God and acting on both of those things is what we need to do here. And so the people who did that, great, they get the words of their being written into the book of life. and they live. And the other ones, that's not what happens, as we will continue to talk about a little bit. And here we see the sea gave up the dead in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead in them. Everybody who has been dead is getting brought back up and judged. And then death and Hades, the place that has been holding dead people, itself is thrown into the lake of fire, right? We don't need it. There aren't dead people now in the sense of how there are now. There aren't then. Now you can be in purgatory, heaven, hell. There are places, right? You can be in places now. Then there's place, and you're going to be in place. So any of this other, and you're not dead, you're alive. There's not dead. There's not places. There's place, and everyone in place is alive. And that's it. So you don't need dead or death or Hades or the sea or any of this stuff now. You just have place, and everyone in place is and will be alive. We're going to see some more of that, and everybody else, lake of fire, which we've talked about some, not quite hell, but kind of hell. And beyond that, the rest of what that is one of those things that may not be known till it happens, and let's hope nobody listening to this learns from firsthand experience what that's like. And that's it, right? We're wrapping up a lot of, we're kind of done with the evil influences. God started to come down. Now we're going to start very rapidly to transform the world and to move into this new end state that can happen in our one place with our live people. We can see what the next thing brings. This has been an overview of Lesson 21 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, the Revelation of Jesus Christ, the Faithful Witness. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.